Bioware has finally made their long-awaited return ever since their critically acclaimed Anthem hit the shelves back in 2019. It's safe to say that the company has been on a massive hot streak ever since Mass Effect Andromeda released. But regardless of their faults, Bioware has a dedicated fanbase that has been waiting patiently for them to return to what they once were, a powerhouse in the industry that pumped out some of the most recognizable games of all time. However, I've watched as Bioware has made a slow decline in quality over the years, and they are almost unrecognizable to their former selves. I don't know what the hell they were doing or thinking when they made Andromeda. That was their strike one. Then they go and shit the bed with Anthem. That was strike two. Now, Veilguard is up. Is it a hit, or is Bioware completely out for the count? It's been 10 long years since Dragon Age Inquisition, and in that time, there has been a lot of change in the gaming atmosphere and in life in general. Expectations have changed, and due to really strong releases in the past couple years, those expectations have risen. I mean, Baldur's Gate 3 came out last year, and that alone raised my personal expectations of what a fantasy RPG can be. Not only does it have to adapt to these new standards with storytelling, characterization, exploration, and overall scale, but it also has to be true to its predecessors and stay distinctly Dragon Age, while also being fresh and original. It's already stacked against incredible odds, and it was only made worse by its drawn-out release date and growing anticipation. It was first named the Dragon Age Dreadwolf, which is such a better name, but sure, okay, Veilguard's fine, I guess. There was also a noticeable shift in tone between all of the different trailers. It felt like Bioware wasn't sure what style of game they wanted to make. It also suffered from some pretty significant leaks prior to its launch. One early leak showed the studio ditching the classic tactical gameplay in exchange for a more accessible hack and slash. For some, this was a complete turnoff and set it up for backlash before any gameplay was officially released. And on top of that, there was a lot of negativity regarding the redesign of the Qunari, rightfully so, because my god. It didn't immediately look good for this game, but I still had high hopes. I simply wanted Bioware to succeed. Is that too much to ask? The gameplay you're gonna see is mostly from Act 1, with minor inclusions from Act 2. I am not spoiling the story or anything like that. I'm not gonna be that guy. But I do want to share overall vibes, tones, and details that appear throughout the game, because this game is so heavily visual, it's really important to cover. The story of Veilguard sees the return of Solus, aka the Dreadwolf, who in the beginning of the game attempts to perform a ritual to tear down the veil. His plans are disrupted, however, by our character Rook, and as a result, two corrupt elven gods named Elgar'nan and Gillenane escape in the Thedas, and they seek to dominate it with their blight. It's then up to Rook to gather a team to stop the gods before they can fully enact their plan. If I'm being honest, the writing in this game is not good. Well, it's actually pretty bad. Okay, it's cheeks. So, the story itself is pretty interesting. It's complex to an extent while also being pretty surface level. However, it's just not told to you in a way that's enjoyable. You get caught in useless dialogue options that for the most part don't actually line up with what you want to say. You'll choose an option that is supposed to be stern or mean, but instead Rook will smile at someone, flip his hair, and give them a kiss on the cheek. It forces a personality onto your character that isn't really of your choosing, which gets annoying really quickly, and all of the options start to blend together as a result. If I want my Rook to be an asshole, let me be an asshole. I want to feel the consequences of my actions in an RPG, because you know RPG stands for role-playing game, and at no point did I feel like I chose a specific role for my character. It felt predetermined from the beginning, and even games like Hogwarts Legacy allow you to be mean, and that game isn't even rated M. For instance, look at these dialogue options. I mean, what's going on here? Seriously, I want to know because I'm genuinely baffled at how bad some of these options are throughout the game. And this goes for the side quests as well. I was having coffee with Lucanus.
You just described my dream cup of coffee.
Whatever the hell this was with Davrin.
What are we all saying?
And frolicking around a garden picking flowers with Emmerich.
A while since I paid homage to our dead.
Would you care to light the candle, Rook?
Some of the quests benefited the story and were very interesting, but a good chunk of them were very boring, and it doesn't help that this game throws side quests at you every time you blink. And this can be attributed to the fact that you can't speak to a character unless they have a quest icon. Which means if you were to go up to a character without this icon, there isn't even an option to talk with them, which is really weird because every other RPG I've ever played allows you to exhaust everyone's dialogue, but instead all you can do here is stare at them until Bioware tells them to wake up. Some may disagree and say this is a useless complaint, but I think this prevents you from learning more about their characters at your own pace. You can't ask questions because the game determines when you talk to them, and as a result, the pacing of the story suffers a bit, because you come down from the high of completing a really good main mission, only to be met with a landfill of side quests and useless exposition from a companion you really don't have any connection with, because you can only talk to them when you're forced to. And it feels like Bioware went the quantity over quality route with the companion quests, while in their previous games this was never the case. The writing and overall tone are my biggest complaints with this game. Everything just felt too PG for my liking. Now, I'm not saying this game doesn't have any darker moments, because it does. They are just too few and far between. Some of the main story missions are great, with their higher stakes and more mature tones, but none of that spills over into the majority of the side quests and dialogue. I can only think of a few that really stood out, and even then they aren't comparable to any of their previous games. Whenever I would turn the corner and see someone standing with a conversation over their head, I just knew I was in for one of the most boring quests ever. But sure, we can go and skip stones while Elgarnon and Gillenane tear Thetis a new asshole. That's completely fine. It's moments like this that take you away from what is actually a pretty great main story. It feels like there was a separate writing team altogether for the side content. The finale, though, is very well done, and the writing is pretty strong. It's grand and epic and feels like a fitting conclusion for the story. It's not perfect, but it does one hell of a job. One of the most impressive things about Veilguard is its visuals. It is absolutely stunning. I mean, just look at some of the scenery. You'd be lying if you said this looks like garbage. From the bright orange trees of Arlethan Forest to the highest mountains in Kalsharok, they all ooze such artistic merit and beauty, and it's hard to not get sidetracked when the visuals are this good. I mean, hell, even the hair is done perfectly, with my luscious locks bobbing up and down with every step I took. The lighting and effects are also just very well done and make the environment feel really dynamic, which adds a layer of depth to anywhere you visit. I can't talk about the visuals and not address the elephant in the room, which is the new art style that Bioware decided to go with. It reminds me of Dishonored, which is a good thing, but the one thing that Dishonored has over Veilguard is its maturity. For everything that Veilguard does right, it is held back by the Pixar-esque tone that is so deeply embedded into the game. The more animated visual style adds to this, which is sad to say, and there's one location that suffers pretty heavily because of this, but I'll get to that in a bit. There are 8 main locations for you to explore, and all of them feel very different from each other. Treviso is my favorite, with its dim, cozy aesthetic, but I think every location had its own appeal, and there wasn't one that stood head and shoulders above the rest. The environmental design has a very similar formula to the recent God of War games, and I liked how it was easy to traverse through all the locations. The only true difference between this and God of War, though, is that you have some of the yappiest companions of all time instead of Atreus. With that being said, I liked having to go back and explore older locations when new sections would pop up. It made me want to explore and made the world feel really interconnected. Remember how I mentioned that there is a location in this game that suffers a bit from the art style? Well, that's Necropolis. On first visit, it seems really cool with its darker, more macabre aesthetic, but after going back and doing side quests with Emmerich and doing the hauntings, I couldn't help but feel like I was in a Goosebumps story or the Haunted Mansion. And take this from someone who's been to the Magic Kingdom during Halloween, this shit is almost identical. Like I said earlier, this game ditched the classic tactical style gameplay in exchange for a pretty refined hack and slash. The combat feels very good, and the attacks are pretty weighty. And this all blended well with the various abilities in the game. Everything felt pretty dynamic, and even though it's technically a hack and slash now, you're still able to command everyone by pausing the game or using the hotbar. it's just not as in-depth as it used to be. The movement was very fluid and fast-paced, which is a lot different than its predecessors. There is a big emphasis on using combos and overwhelming the enemy as fast as possible. I at first had some complaints with the combat, mostly the parrying. However, a lot of them went away when I got further into the game. It also helped that I became very tanky, so even if I did get hit during the late game, it really didn't matter at all. The combat overall was very polished, and there was never a time where I thought it was a chore to play at all. I think it's definitely the glue that holds this game together, because despite all of its flaws, at the end of the day, it's a very fun game to play. The attack indicator, however, was something I really didn't like throughout the whole game, even after growing accustomed to the fighting style. The marker got drowned out very easily because of all the effects on the screen. The abilities in this game are all visually impressive, but holy shit, sometimes you cannot see what is going on. Though, the abilities open up the opportunity to build craft, which is surprisingly great. I played as a warrior and specialized in the Reaper tree, and it was absolutely broken in every single fight. I do wish the companions had more opportunities to build craft with different specializations and whatnot. Their skill trees are much more simplified, but they do get extra passives once you complete all of their quests and gain the heroic title for them. Though they lack skill depth, the companions are insanely powerful and reliable. Unlike previous Dragon Age games where your companions would have to be revived if they got down, in Veilguard they literally cannot die. You never have to worry about them, and it's hard to say if this is a good thing or a bad thing. Much like every other Bioware game, you naturally gravitate towards the two companions you really like and stick with them for the majority of the game. I did this in the Mass Effect trilogy with Garrus and Liara, and I did it honestly with this game too. I enjoyed pairing Ballara's galvanized terror ability with Emmerich's explosive skeleton. My FPS would take a nosedive, but the whole area would be cleared at the cost of my PC choking to death. The upgrade and enchanting system in the lighthouse, however, is pretty bare bones, no matter what you're going for. The enchanting in this game is kind of odd, because it is completely free and you get some pretty hefty benefits, so I'm not really complaining at all, but it is a little weird that you can just enchant whenever you want without any form of rune or currency. This played into the lack of risks for me. Your companions can't die, and you can't go broke unless you try. But it does help make you even more tanky, which I liked. In terms of performance, the entire game ran great, and guess what? It doesn't have the nouveau, which is the cherry on top. It's rare that we get a AAA game that looks this good and actually runs insanely well. It's also really polished. I didn't run into a single bug, which is miles better than Andromeda, so Bioware is definitely on the right track when it comes to that. Bioware has always excelled with its companions, minus Andromeda of course, and this game is somewhere in between that. Yeah, it's better than Andromeda, but it is nowhere near the level of their older games. It's not even close. It took a while for me to really come around and care for these characters, and even then it was only a select few that I really cared for. The others I was kind of just neutral with. Harding starts as your first real companion, and I honestly have no complaints about her characterization. She was a steady character, and I really enjoyed how they brought in characters from Inquisition to tie the two games together. She was enjoyable and had some fun quests. Then you meet Nev, and I can't say I enjoyed her as much as Harding. Her performance was benign and a bit bland. There were times when she would just stare into the distance or speak with exactly one tone. She contributed greatly to the story, of course, but her one-note personality was a constant throughout the whole game. She has sort of a redemption arc in the final act with her heroic actions, but even then it feels like she was emotionless given the circumstance. I wasn't a fan of Ballara in the very beginning. I found her to be pretty annoying when she kept pointing out the obvious or chatting with the other characters mid-fight, but as I kept playing, I ended up romancing her. I'll talk about the romance in a minute because I've seen better romance on the back of a cereal box. Ballara, however, grew on me slowly. Talking to her was at least interesting, and I liked how she seemed to have a constant growth in character. Her backstory too was very touching and rounded out her motivations well. Lucanus is one of my favorite characters, just because of his backstory and relationship dynamics with other companions. He literally cooks everyone their favorite meal later in the story, and he just seems like a very good-meaning guy. I mean, he literally just talks about coffee for the whole game. I didn't enjoy all of his side quests, as most of them felt pretty insubstantial, but the actual missions that focused around his family and spite were fun and well written. Spite as well was a pretty good character, even though a bird gets more screen time and story development than he does, which is crazy by the way. He's also just shoved inside of Lucanus like a can of sardines. Davron, I thought, was a pretty solid character. His personality does entirely revolve around the Griffins, but his voice actor did a pretty good job even if he was a little one note at times. His quests were much like everyone else's, but Asan was a good addition to his character even though they made it his whole personality, which is a pretty common trend in this game. Emmerich honestly had the most potential, at least I think. However, I felt like he read too much like a Disney character, and he was a bit too much like a pediatrician. He has a really cool aesthetic, and his personality is pretty solid throughout the game. I also loved his final form. Without spoilers, it's sick. He's also accompanied by his skeleton butler named Manfred. We love Manfred. Tosh also had potential, but was failed by the bland voice acting and writing. They felt like a diversity poll, as if they were written by a bunch of white cis dudes. Their personality focused too heavily on their identity and didn't develop into anything else. It also doesn't help that Tosh is just not very likable. Their commentary just misses being funny or insightful, and it's downright annoying at times. They could have been such a strong character for representation in media, but damn, they're just annoying.
Let me talk to them! I want to talk to...
Why does it feel like the only person who wants to talk to Rook is Spite? The fact that literally none of the characters ever interact with Rook outside of their specific quests is insane. It feels like Rook is everyone's best friend and no one is their best friend. They're the perpetual mediator, constantly breaking up meaningless squabbles between the companions.
Because I like them?
You're barely even wearing a shirt.
You fight Anton with a bare midriff.
Everything all right?
We're fine. Just trading fashion tips. So what I wear is a problem for you?
It's not. It's just... why dress like that? Are you trying to make your mother happy?
I don't know what your problem is here, Tosh, but you're out of line.
Relax, Rook. I'm a big girl.
There were times where I'd be in combat and they would shout words of encouragement like I was up to bat in a Little League game. I also just wish there was more aesthetic options for the male models. I felt like I was pretty limited in my choice of hair and beard, but mostly hair. This honestly goes for every bit of customization in this game. I felt like the armor wasn't really cool. There was only a select number of pieces I actually liked, and the others were just goofy as hell. Now the romance, or really the lack thereof. As I mentioned, I romanced Balara, but it might as well have been a brick wall. Every time my Rook and her talked about our relationship, it felt like two really good friends just being grateful for one another with random I love yous thrown in. The mature scenes were the same sort of PG feeling as the humor and language as the rest of the game. Compared to previous Bioware games where not much was hidden, this game had everything hidden. Only with certain characters was there even slight nudity. Ultimately, it felt like the romance options in this game weren't fully realized and were put on the back burner. Dragon Age Veilguard made a significant departure from its predecessors. It left behind a lot of key elements that really made prior games. From the writing to the tone to the overall feel, Veilguard rarely felt like a true Bioware game. Does it make it a bad game? No. Not at all, actually. I'm just disappointed because this game had potential to be a great entry into the series. As a standalone game, it's honestly pretty solid, minus some characterization failures and story execution. This game would make for a good entry-level RPG. But it doesn't make for a good Dragon Age installation. It's like a baby's first Bioware game, Little Tykes RPG if you will. Now of course this is my personal opinion from my playthrough of the game, but if you enjoyed it, continue to enjoy it. I know I did regardless of everything, and I do look forward to the new Mass Effect. My hope is that they learn from Veilguard and actually embrace what made their games great in the first place. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe. Stay tuned for the next one.